So I'm really interested to get into a conversation with Jane Powell. Jane is involved in so many different food-related projects and organisations across Wales and beyond, including being a coordinator for the Wales Food Manifesto, a coordinator with Renew Wales. She's helped to organise the Wales Real Food and Farming Conference. She was formerly involved as a regional education coordinator, linking up schools with farmers, and currently working with Garden Organic, promoting community gardening in the Dyfi biosphere. Welcome, Jane. Thanks so much for coming to talk to me.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
In the run-up to our food system conference, I really wanted to sort of pick your brains about what you think are the key opportunities and challenges facing our regional food system here in South West Wales. We really want to position the conference in the context of all the great stuff that is already happening. And I know there's loads of policy development and sort of national strategy already happening. And obviously our focus is on what can we co-produce and co-create as people, businesses, organisations, community groups? You know, how can we all be part of a solution, and what actions are needed to move us forward towards a more sustainable food system? But you wrote a piece recently for the Institute of Welsh Affairs, and one of the themes that came through on that was that there are lots of competing priorities when it comes to land use. Is that one of the key issues facing our food system, access to land?
I think it has to be, really, doesn't it? Because that's where we grow our food. Or if we sort of assume that we'll just be able to buy it in forever. The government really hasn't been thinking about how Wales feeds itself, because we'll always be able to import it. We should question that, really. And we should at least think about how much of our food we want to import. I think we should at least consider it, have some sort of idea, like we want to grow 20% of it, or we want to grow 80% of it, or we want to grow all our fruit, well, you know, say half of our fruit and vegetables, or even, you know, so the things that we can grow, just to strengthen that. I think we should at least asking that. And once, of course, when you've asked that, you then have to look at land use, because you have to see how much land you've got to grow it. And if we're going to take our best land, which would be our best, you know, the flat, fertile land that you can grow vegetables on, which is also really handy for building supermarkets and car parks, because they they need flat land as well. We need a policy about that. And I mean, I'm no expert on this, but I don't think we've got one. And then there's a lot of concern. People have a lot of concern, for instance, about these intensive poultry units that are just going up everywhere. And they'd like to know, can we have a say about that? And then, of course, there's been this thing in the news recently about whole farms being sold off. I think British Airways bought sort of 3 farms or something in Carmarthenshire with a plan to plant trees all over them to offset flights, which is not really what most of us want to see. I mean, if trees are going to be planted, at least pay farmers to plant the trees. Don't just buy the land and get a contractor in. So there's all these questions here about land use.
Interesting what you're saying about importing food and how much of our food we're importing. So the UK government is rushing around post-Brexit trying to make all these trade deals with countries around the world, and one of those that's hit the headlines has been a trade deal with Australia around importing lamb and, I suppose, beef from Australia. You know, that's not the right direction of travel, surely. I mean, what do farmers think about that? And should we?
Yeah, well, they're not very impressed, are they? And one of the things that they point out is that the farming standards in Australia are different. Again, I'm not the expert on this, but I think they have much bigger farms. Animal welfare is much more rough and ready. Certainly different regulation, a different regulatory environment, which means that they can be undercutting Welsh farms. And I think we should be having a conversation about that. I don't want to say that's how it is, because I don't know enough, but there should be a conversation about that, about the whole sort of regulatory environment. And then, because of Brexit, there's an internal markets bill that London has passed, which makes it harder for Wales to have its own regulatory standards anyway. It means that so we have to follow theirs. And so that puts another squeeze on things, gives us less control over our food system. So we have to do some sharp thinking, I think, about how we fix that one.
And so you're position is that Wales needs a community food strategy. And I think what you're getting at there is we need to have a plan, but we also need to kind of co-create that plan, give communities more of a voice. I mean, explain to us a bit about what you think a community food strategy could do and why it's so important.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing here is that actually probably we need a national food strategy, because we need to be looking at things like food, you know, what is our food, how much food do you want to produce, like I was saying earlier, and what foods are we going to import, especially, you know, are we going to import livestock feed that's grown on land that was once tropical rainforest, which the size of Wales is pushing for, pushing against, of course. So you know, a national food strategy might be a very good thing. However, we're not being offered one. The Welsh government has been asked for one and has said no. What they are offering instead is a community food strategy. So it's partly, you know, make the best of what you're given. But actually, I think there's genuine opportunities with the community food strategy. If we take the government at their word and say, okay, right, let's have a community food strategy, then that's when we can really call on the power of the community to change things. And there's a lot of energy at grassroots. And also what happens at the grassroots is that you naturally integrate things more. It's harder to have that silo thinking because the food that we do locally cuts across all parts of our lives. You know, we might have children at the local school, we might know a farmer, we're buying food. It's harder to think in this separate silo way when you're working locally. So let's make the best of it, and let's exploit the opportunity, you know, to have a really grounded food policy that gets everything in.
I think the breaking down silos seems to me, you know, the key thing, and it's one of the aspirations we have whenever we organise a For the Region event. Breaking down silos is kind of really high on our agenda. I don't know whether we'll be successful at attracting farmers and schools and policymakers and heads of procurement, as well as local businesses and bigger companies and people and community groups all into one conversation. You know, that's the sort of conversation we feel really needs to happen, because quite often these groups aren't talking to each other. Am I right in feeling that there's a sense of tension between the environmental movement, if I can call it that, and the farming community? Do we want the same things? And are we talking to each other enough? Or are farmers fed up of hearing climate warriors talking about veganism? You know, what's the tension there?
Well, there is quite a bit of tension. I mean, on wildlife versus food production, you know, there was a big controversy in Mid Wales over the Summit to Sea project and rewilding, but it's now been resolved because the project is now talking to farmers and asking them what they want, and they're responding. And I think farmers are looking for alternatives. You know, and there's a lot of interest in the NFU is committed to a target of zero carbon farming. I forget it's either 2040 or 2050. So and the younger generation in particular really committed to that. And there's lots of farmers, you know, all keen to measure their carbon cycles and see whether they're sequestering carbon. And also there's a lot of interest in alternatives like agroforestry, for instance, or orchards. I think there is a lot of interest in the farming community in change. It saddens them, you know, to see this very polarized debate into plant-based foods is good, livestock foods is bad, as if it's as simple as that, when it's so much more complicated. There's a lot of polarized thinking, which comes from just people just not talking past each other, and people wanting to have an easy answer. Oh, I'm just going to eat less meat. Phew, you know, that's decided, without looking into what sort of meat. You know, is it intensively farmed poultry? Is it beef from, you know, that was conservation grazing that was maintaining wildlife? Is it local? Is it from Australia? Meat is not one thing, and plant-based is not one thing. So there's a sort of grain of truth in that we probably need to eat a bit less meat, but it could be better meat. So it's a much more subtle conversation that needs to be had.
What are the opportunities to link schools into these conversations? I know, as I've previously mentioned, one of your past roles was working to connect schools and farmers. Are schools thinking enough about the food they serve and about, I guess, what kids are learning at school? Or is that another silo?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of this, obviously, and I find a really strong response sometimes in schools and pupils, young, children, just to talk about the food in their local area, to meet a farmer, to have we've done the demonstration school meals where all the food is locally sourced, and you see the power of that, how it really brings people together and starts conversations. And there's huge potential there, especially with the new curriculum, which is and one of its 4 aims is to create ethical and informed citizens. And then it's got an area of learning and learning and education. Sorry, an area of something which is about health and well-being. So that's a fresh approach as well. And then there's also the ethos of the new curriculum, which is that teachers are to be really free to create their own learning pathways for the pupils in response to where they live, to the strengths of their local area. So if your school is on the beach, like Barmouth, for instance, their school is pretty much on the beach. So they use the beach, they take the kids out onto the beach, and then they learn everything to do with the tides and fisheries and that sort of thing. If it's in a rural area, visit a farm. If it's in an urban area, you can visit a community garden, you can visit, I don't know, anything at all, a steelworks. There's all places, so children can be learning from their local environment. They can practice citizenship there and then. The problem that schools have is, well, just sort of lack of resources, lack of confidence, lack of knowledge. They can't do this on their own. It can't be just something that's landed on teachers. Okay, go and do this, because it just creates such anxiety and pressure. They need people to come in from outside and help them and say, look, if you'd like, we can help you with this, but with our farm, with our food factory, with our beach, with whatever it is. So and that really needs local knowledge. It needs somebody living locally who's like a broker and knows all the people to talk to. The friendly farmer, the fisherman, the food business that's interested in a bit of sponsoring something, the community garden, this person, that person. And then you can help those conversations to happen. The best teachers to work with were the ones who were farmers' wives, because they had a foot in both camps, and they could really make things happen. It's that sort of thing, and it's a really human thing. It's knowing that somebody who knows somebody and having that trust, and then you can create a fantastic learning environment for children, which draws them into adulthood. These are adult responsibilities. Growing food is an adult responsibility. You are going to be an adult. You need to know about this.
Yeah, I would love to think that teachers might come along to our conference, and that those sorts of alliances might form through dialogue. If we can gather together a cohort of teachers across the region that are interested in working more with children about food in all different ways, I'm sure there are organisations and partners that would love to get into schools. And I know, for example, some of the community supported agriculture projects, Kai Tan in the Swansea area, they have a number of food projects where they're going into schools and teaching kids how to grow all the ingredients to make a pizza, and they take them on this sort of journey to learn about food through pizza, which all kids love. So yeah, I really resonate with what you've said there about just relationships and talking to each other and finding sort of areas of common interest. Also, you were talking about citizenship and raising our children to be good citizens, but one of the phrases that's come out a lot in my reading around food over the last few weeks is this idea that we should all be active food citizens, and the importance of local food movements. Can you talk to that, and what role have local food movements in all of this?
Yes, I think this is a really interesting one. I mean, there's a lot of work there's actually a project called Food Citizenship. You can look it up on the net, foodcitizenship.net, I think the address is. And the central thinking of that is that it's an alternative to consumerism. And there's been all this work done in social psychology. If you get a group of people and you talk to them as if they were consumers, like you get them to take part in a consumer study, and then get them to give them a problem to solve, as compared to giving them asking them to take part in a citizen study and giving them the same problem to solve. If they think of themselves as consumers, they're much more passive, much more selfish, much less trusting of other people. If you talk, and of course our culture talks to us as consumers. It says, you know, buy the cheapest, look at this, it's all, you know, you want to be this sort of person. And not just shops, but even, you know, healthcare and education are a bit like that. Shop around, find the best school, find the best healthcare, know your rights, you know, demand your rights. And all of them, they talk to us like children. Like, you know, what sweet would you like to have, you know, and what pester your parents so you can have, you know, and writing your MP becomes a bit like pester your parents. Whereas in the citizenship model, no, you have agency. Stop, you know, you can't make excuses. We all have agency. We've all got something that we can do, that we can say, which has nothing to do with how much money we've got. It's about the power of humanity. So if you talk to people in that way and engage with them in that way, with responsibility, with agency, I mean, just imagine if we all did that and started saying what we saying, not saying what we wanted, but starting to create what we want through whatever we do, gardening, or the way, just the way we talk, actually, the way we relate to each other.
Yeah, that's powerful, isn't it? Thinking of ourselves as citizens, remembering that we are citizens, and it does bring out that more collective feeling, you know, and sense of we're all in this together and we all have responsibility for each other, much more so than kind of thinking of ourselves as consumers. And so all across Wales, and I'm sure elsewhere, local groups are getting together, whether it's, I guess, community garden projects, food banks has been a big one, and I suppose farmers markets and local street markets. These are all part of, you know, the passion that people have locally for thinking about food. Do you see the potential of these kind of really small scale local initiatives to create the kind of massive culture shift that's needed? I sometimes wonder whether it feels a bit futile, the things that we can do locally. Are they having a difference, are making a difference?
Well, this is a fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, people often say, oh, I mean, if you look at the numbers, obviously, you know, local food is tiny in terms of, you know, tons of carrots or whatever it is, and the supermarkets are vast. But who says that that's the right way to look at things? Numbers. I don't think we look enough at the qualitative side of things and the shift in consciousness that local food produces. And, you know, we live in a very globalized society, as we keep being told, but nevertheless we actually live in local communities, and who's to say that those local communities don't really count just because they're small? And so I think actually the you know, the shift in consciousness is a form of power in itself. And that's where it starts. And if we don't want to be living in a world where everything is globalized and everything is a transaction and everything is reduced to monetary value, and therefore the more money you've got, the more important you are, and the less money you've got, well, frankly, we don't need to talk to you because you haven't got any money. If that's, you know, if that's if that's not the sort of society we want to live in, what do we do about it? And actually, local food is a really tangible, obvious thing that we can all do. I mean, everybody can do that. You know, if it's just growing a radish in a yogurt pot or something, we can all do something. And so it gives people their power back. So actually, I think it's tremendously significant. And it's just it's just part of the story that we're in, that local is small and local is unimportant, and, you know, what counts is how much money you've got and how senior your job is. And we're all enthralled by that story, but actually I don't think it's really the right one. And by going out, you know, volunteering at your local allotment or just growing some herbs in the windowsill, you're just making a little statement. No, actually, this is what I believe in.
It's not easy to buy local, but it's becoming easier, and it's not as convenient as just popping into the supermarket and filling up your trolley, but it's incredibly rewarding. And I suppose even if we can just make small steps in that direction, the great thing about buying local and supporting local producers is that it's creating those economic opportunities locally. I know that there's a real I know that Duncan from Our Food, which is a Wales-based project, talks a lot about the exodus of young people from rural communities because they haven't got the jobs. So anything we can do to support local producers and create those local supply chains, I suppose, starts to create economic activity and jobs and rebuild rural economies.
I mean, it's all interconnected, isn't it? I think, you know, perhaps my work is more on the side of building food culture, but food culture is like a tilth in which food economy can grow. It helps to shift, it helps to create that shift in values, that shift in attitudes that then feeds into more, you know, purchasing of local food by people who can afford it. I mean, not everybody can. That's true. Not everybody can afford local food. There's often a premium that comes with it. But there's other sorts of local food activity we can all be involved with, even if we can't do that. You know, going to a community meal. I mean, Aberystwyth, we have, I don't know how many, most days of the week, there's some sort of pay as you feel community meal where anybody can go along and you pay or you don't, depending. So that's something that anybody can take part in, and that's helping to build a local food culture, which then should, you know, could and should drive local food economy that then creates jobs, and then it's a virtuous circle. It raises the prestige, you get more jobs, you get more interest, you have more skills, you know, and then you're starting to build a thriving local economy and culture.
Jane, tell me a bit about the Wales Food Manifesto. You were really involved in the creation of that. Tell us about the story of how that came to be and what's happening with that.
Okay, well, that started in 2015. I was working for Organic Centre Wales at the time at Aberystwyth University. We made a project called Food Values, which was all about, you know, as I was talking about, the values that are associated with food. And I remember I was talking to Peter Davis, a Sustainable Development Commissioner, who helped to launch it with Jane Davidson. And he had this story about big food and little food. And big food was, you know, was Tesco's, and little food is the corner shop or the allotment or the small business. And so it really starts me thinking, well, how do you connect big food and little food, because it's all food. And Jane Davidson had suggested that there should be a food manifesto for Wales. And so I thought, well, okay, if we're going to have a food manifesto, how does that connect? How does that bring together big food and little food? So those are the questions that I had from both of them, really. And I thought, well, maybe values is the way that you connect the two of them. I mean, people with values, because there's people in big business who actually care, plenty of people in big business who've got families who live in their local communities and who care about that. It's not true to say that people in business only think about money. And then, of course, there's lots of people in small businesses who are working sort of artisan food or something, but they also need to make a living. I mean, it's not true to say that they don't care about money. You know, we all care about money. We're all human. So there are values which connect all of us. So the idea of the Food Manifesto was to come across some principles that really everybody could sign up to. I mean, it's hard to disagree with, you know, the principle that everybody ought to have good quality food, and all children should learn something about food. You know, whether you're boss of Tesco's or you're, you know, a community gardener, you can connect over that. So it was to have a set of values, a set of principles that really everybody could connect over, even if they didn't always follow them, because actually none of us could follow all of them, because we live in the real world. We all have to compromise. So it wasn't about having impossible expectations. It was about having aspirations and values that we could connect over, and then start to see where the connections were between these very different worlds of big food and small food. It's sitting there as a manifesto. We use the website to publish articles on, so we sort of build this conversation. But the manifesto itself, sort of as a project, it did languish slightly, and so that's why and then the next thing that came along was the Wales Real Food and Farming Conference. And actually, events are much more galvanizing than websites. So a lot of the energy has gone into the event, and we're going to do our third of them this autumn, and we hope it'll be an in-person event in North Wales, but we're about to announce that. But this is a sort of national event, really, to connect people over these principles of environmental food production, social justice and well-being and all of that.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm really conscious that we mustn't replicate great work that's already been done, and in fact we should all try and build on each other's great work that's already happened. The Wales Food Manifesto talks about food production that respects environmental limits, minimising waste in the food system, shortening supply chains, playing an active role in the global food system. That's part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations goal about being globally responsible here in Wales. Welsh farmers responding to local demands, everyone in Wales understanding where their food comes from, children getting involved in where their food comes from and being able to eat healthily, and government recognising and valuing the social, economic, environmental and cultural impacts of food. So, you know, real great articulation of values, and of course that fundamental one that everyone in Wales, and it speaks to food poverty and food security as well, everyone having access to high quality, nutritious and safe food. So we know what we want from our food system. What's your advice to us For the Region as we seek to convene this regional conference? What would you love to see coming out of a regional food conversation, and any sort of advice or ideas about what we could focus our conversations on?
This is where I don't know really. I mean, I'm so excited you're doing it, because I think we need these regional conferences. We need to work at all levels, don't we? We need to work nationally, we need to work locally, and then there needs to be an in-between where we work regionally. So I think just the fact that you're doing it is fantastic, and I think we'll just have to see what comes out of it. Building trust is so important, and creating a story that people can be part of. That's another way of putting it. I'd love to see what sort of story emerges from, you know, Swansea and Carmarthenshire and Neath Talbot and Pembrokeshire. I mean, you've got such an interesting collection there. You've got the very urban, industrial, post-industrial. You've got the very agricultural. You've got you've got a little microcosm of Wales in there, and I just think it's just fascinating to see what comes out of it. And I think it's personal connections just drive it, really. You know, the connections that you make at an uplifting conference like that can just start new conversations. And it's about emergence. You don't know what's going to happen, so it's like holding a space where you don't know what's going to happen, but being prepared for something wonderful to come out of it. So I don't know, really. I really don't know.
No, I love what you've said there. I mean, that really is what we're all about, emergence. And the way we run a conference is actually not a whole load of speakers. It's more about everybody in the room having the opportunity to speak from their own perspective and for us all to listen to each other. And I just find it amazing when you do that, you know, what emerges, and hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation of what can we all do. But it's partly being inspired by what people and organisations across our region are already doing, and kind of learning from best practice. I know in Carmarthenshire Council there's a lot of work going on around food procurement, so it'd be really interesting to hear more about that, and at community levels and community supported agricultural projects, what works, what's not working, what are the challenges. So hopefully it'll just be a listening and learning and sharing opportunity, and as you say, let's see what emerges. Just to sort of close up our conversation, Jane, what are you personally really excited about and passionate about at the moment? I know you're currently working for Garden Organics, and you talked about the Dovey biosphere. Where do your personal passions lie in this food system at the moment?
It's to do with local, place-based, the idea of, as I was talking really about the idea of food citizenship, sort of humanity. But I suppose, I mean, one thing I'm really excited about is I've been running coaching circles for a while now. And so getting groups of people together to, well, one person presents a problem and the other people sort of support them to find solutions. And so getting into the really fine-grained detail of how these groups work and how change happens and and what blocks it, and people's sort of personal blockages to it, and how if someone's supported to find their own answers, they will. We're all experts in our own situation. We all actually have have our own unique insights. It's just that we've somehow been conditioned to think that we don't count, and you know, and other people have got all the power. So I'm really interested in this sort of personal empowerment that comes from, you know, the particular details of anyone's life, you know, where we live, our actual local communities, our relationships, our aspirations, and bringing that full humanity. And food, of course, does that. That's the thing about food. It's such a physical thing, an individual thing. So I'm really interested in yeah, and how we get a sort of, when individuals can have a breakthrough, how communities can have a breakthrough and start to feel like, yeah, they are actually in the driving seat. They can determine their futures.
Amazing. Yeah, reconnecting us all with our own sense of agency is such important work, and especially when the scale of the challenges we all face seems so massive, finding our own way through that and recognizing that we do have wisdom and we do have insight, or you know, valuable work to do in the world. So that sounds like really amazing work. Yeah, great to talk to you, Jane, and we really appreciate all your input and advice as we start to kind of pull this conference together. Zoe and I are not experts in the food system, although we're food lovers and we love local food. So we're on a learning journey and trying to bring others with us on that journey. So really appreciate your time in talking to me, and we'll look forward to catching up with you as part of that conference on the 5th and 6th of October. And for anyone listening, please do make sure you're registered. The link is on Eventbrite. If you search for Regional Food Conference for South West Wales, you'll find it. Please sign up and come along. You can either come after work on the Tuesday evening or during work on Wednesday morning, or both. It will be a really inclusive conversation, and we really do want all parts of the system to come along. We keep saying, if you eat food, you're invited. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much, Jane, for your time this morning.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this discussion. I'm looking forward to the event. I shall be there.
Lovely. Thanks very much, and bye for now.